Data science and statistics is all about data sets and data frames. In this video, I want to show you how you can get familiar with new data sets, which you may get from your colleagues from work, or which you can even find as pre-installed exercise data sets in R. Because there is this package called datasets, which is already part of R base. And if we take a look at the documentation for this datasets package, you can see that there are many datasets within this package. So all of those are different datasets. In my R tutorials, I'm quite often using those datasets. So for example, I like to use the iris dataset, the links dataset, or the rivers dataset. And now I'm going to show you a few ways in how you can get familiar with new datasets. In this exercise, I'm using the links dataset. The first thing we could do is we could type $links, and this should actually open the help section for the links dataset. Alright, so now we see that links is part of the datasets package. And over here we see the heading. It's about annual Canadian links trappings. And then we also see the description or the kind of variables which are in this dataset. So this is one way of how we can get the underlying information about this dataset. If we type in head and then brackets the name of the dataset, we would get the first 6 elements of that dataset. Now over here we see the links trappings for the first 6 years in this dataset. So this would be 1821, 22, 23, and so on. So this was the head function. We could actually do the same thing. We could also type in tails and the name of the dataset, and then you would get the last 6 numbers within this dataset. If we do the same thing with the iris dataset, which is a bit more complex, we actually get this output over here. In this case, we again see the first 6 datasets of this iris dataset. We also see that this dataset is organized a bit more complex because we have several columns. So those here are the columns like sepal length, sepal width, up to species. And we also see that there are several rows in that dataset. So this is a typical example of a data frame. And data frames are, briefly spoken, the most important types of objects in R, because most of the works you will be doing in R is with datasets. The most important characteristic about a dataset is that it is organized two-dimensionally. As I told you, it has rows and columns, and the data within this dataset is of a different type. And this is exactly what we can see here, because we have numeric values like 3.5 or 3.0 or 3.2, but we also have characters. So the column species contains several characters. And I know that in this case we have 3 different species, so there are 3 different types of characters. And we can use those characters as some kind of grouping factors, which is quite important if we want to do, for example, box plots. So this is a typical dataset which I like to use to exemplify different strategies in R, and I also use it quite often if I want to do graphs, for example. So this is a typical data frame in R. Another thing we could do is we could just type in summary and name of the dataset, and this would then give us some kind of basic statistical output with a minimum, the maximum, the median, and the first and third quantiles, and the means. So those are basically the most important ways in how you can get a quick look at how your data is actually structured. So it's head and tail and summary, and to get the help function for that dataset, you can just type in ? and the name of the dataset. If you actually want to get a quick visual idea of your data, you could type in, for example, plot and then the name of the dataset. And if you would run this line, you would see that you get a first and simple plot. In this case, since links is a time series dataset, I get this kind of time series plot. We see that we have the links trappings number on the y-axis, and we have the time on the x-axis. And we also see that there is some kind of up and down intervals in this kind of dataset. Another way to get a quick visual idea of this dataset would be typing in hist and then name of the dataset, and this would give us a simple histogram. In this case, I would see that trappings between 0 and 1000 per year are the most frequent, and the other one would be declining in frequency. So plot and hist is a very simple way to get a first visual impression of your dataset. If you want to work with subsets of your data frames, you can use the dollar signs to actually extract a part of that dataset. So again, let's take a look at the iris dataset. We have those 5 columns, and 4 of those columns are numeric. And let's say in this case we just want to get the sum of one of those columns, let's say the first column, sepal length. What we now need to do is we need to specify for the computer which subset within this dataset we want to sum up. We already know that sum is the command for a summation, and we also know that the dataset is called iris and the subset is called sepal length. So in this case we just need to state sum brackets name of the dataset, which in this case is iris, and then we can use the dollar sign to specify which subset we want to use from this dataset. And if we now run this line, we see that the sum of this subset of our iris dataset is 876.5. So this was one way of how you can actually work with a subset of a data frame. Another way would be to completely attach this dataset to your environment so that you would not always have to specify the name of this dataset. The command for that would be attach and then iris. So now the computer knows that I want to work with the iris dataset, and it recognizes now the name of a subset of the dataset. So in this case I could just type in sum sepal length without iris and without the dollar sign, and I would get the exact same result. So this attach function is a very useful function which can make your work within R much easier.